Hey trainers, and welcome back to another episode of Future Sight, which is of course a soundproof podcast production. We're happy to be back with some contemporary content that actually happened just this past weekend. We're excited to bring you guys that. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, of course, as always, my name is Brendan. I go by Mr. BDog46 on the internet, and I am joined by Jake, who goes by Major Bowman in most places on the internet as well. We're excited to be back. I don't know about you, Jake, but I had the itch to do it, especially after being at this tournament last weekend. And I know you were there too, so I assume you got the same itch.
Yeah, it was fun being there and seeing the matches on stream and just thinking like, okay, which of these we're going to do? Because we always knew we were going to do this one the week after San Diego. So honestly, like all the matches I saw on stream were great. We were both playing on day one for the first 70% of it, so we couldn't watch those, but day two was really fun to watch, and I think this match that we picked was my favorite of the tournament for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and it's always nice when the favorite match of the tournament is the finals, of course, and I think we got a match that, and we've had a couple of these that we've sort of selected from yesteryear as well, where we kind of try to pick some of these sets that are reflective of metagames at the time, and I think we really kind of like captured that pretty well, based on what ended up being in the finals. So of course we are going to bring you the 2023 Series 1 Regional from San Diego. We alluded to it, I guess I'll just come right down and say it. And this is the finals match that is between Chuppa Cross, as you can see, and Jiseok Lee. So this ended up being a really exciting match. We got to watch all of Cut. And both of these players looked really strong on stream, the times that they were on as well, and also were running a really cool and interesting teams.
We're going to pretend the transition to this was smooth and that it didn't click the wrong thing at first.
I didn't see anything.
But yeah, no, I agree. It's cool because I think if you look at Chuppa's team, it's kind of what you would expect if you were to think of kind of a standard Dondozo team. Maybe not the Arcanine, but like Palmat, Miascarada, Golden Go, those are all very common on these Dondozo teams because they're all very conducive to like kind of the clear the way for Dondozo, or even the opposite sometimes where you let Dondozo do its thing and then you revival blessing and bring it back in. Kind of a standard Dondozo build. Jiseok's team, on the other hand, Garganackle was kind of around at the beginning of the format with like the Iron Defense body press set. It kind of went away for a while. I really hadn't been seeing too much of it. But this Terra Poison Garganackle I think was really cool, and he even said in the winner's interview, he was like, the only ground moves are like Garchomp Earthquake, which I can just wide guard, which he did have wide guard, and that's pretty much it. Like not much else has a ground move right now, and so Poison makes Poison really strong, like defensive Terra type. I think the Bex Caliber is also honestly, Bex and Tauros Water are two big things that also showed up at San Diego too. So it's cool that we kind of get to see the Dondozo and these other kind of outside picks that happen to do very well overall at this tournament.
Right, and again, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, please appreciate the upgrades that Jake made today to the layout, which we're very excited about. I think it's an appropriate time as well, because we are now in, well, at least temporarily, I don't want to say the open team sheet era, but we did play our first major with open team sheets, so I think this is cool that we can kind of have the information available that the players had as well. But now to dial back, yeah, I think this was kind of cool because the team specifically is that this Dondozo stuff was like very meta at the time. I was kind of under the impression that it was actually dying off a little bit going into the tournament, but I think it becomes clear that that was not at all the case. It was very well represented among top players, and then the team that Jiseok was running is what I would consider to be, at least at this point in the metagame, kind of like counter meta, and you can sort of, or at least off meta, where you can kind of see some of the checks that are built in to some of the common meta Pokemon that were in the tournament, or at least in the meta. Curse Mimikyu, a pretty strong Dondozo check. The Garganackle, especially with Terra Poison, another pretty strong Dondozo check in addition to some of the other stuff that likes to sit on the field and you put a timer on it. And then to me, as far as usage goes, Tauros was kind of like the big riser at this tournament, where it showed up kind of like way more than at least I expected it to. You know, maybe that wasn't the case among some other top players, but Water Tauros in particular had like a huge showing at this tournament.
I think it's cool because a lot of people were shying away from Intimidate in general, large, partly because there are two very good Defiant Pokemon in Annihilate and King Gambit, and partly because people were using Clear Amulet for a while and it just made Intimidate a lot less useful. Generally speaking, Intimidate's value went down in the time leading up to this tournament, which in turn made people stop running Clear Amulet and some Annihilate or Vital Spirit. And King Gambit was still an issue, but if you use either of the Tauros, Water or Fire, they still stomp on King Gambit anyway. And so it's kind of cool that these popped up as a result of what was already like 8 days into the new year. We've already had a significant meta shift like that. I think that's really neat.
Yeah, definitely agree with you, and it's really cool. And I think just before we start here, Jake, just because we have all this like cool information available to us and all of the cool pictures available to us and that our audience can see it, just to kind of highlight some of the things that we're thinking about as we're thinking about as we're going into team preview, is that first of all, I think whenever you play against Dondozo, you want to think about what kind of Dondozo it is, and what kind of unique tools it brings to the table. So the one that Chuppa is running is obviously, as you can see, Terra Dragon, and it has the Chesto Berry, which means it's the rest set, and we'll come to find out that it's running Order Up, Wave Crash, and Earthquake, I believe.
Yes.
So I think that's really important to point out. And then the other kind of notable thing to me on Chuppa's team, like Assault Vest Arcanine, not very common, but I don't really care about it that much because we know what it does, is the choice for Choice Band Meowscarada, which is kind of an interesting contrast. And I believe it actually comes up in this set to the Sash version that Jiseok is running. And they kind of have like an interesting interaction with each other. And then, of course, we've talked a little bit about it already, but Poison Garganackle, pretty sweet. You can kind of look at the teams already and see that Chuppa's going to have a little bit of a hard time breaking it. And then Loaded Dice Baxcalibur, I think, is a really cool tech as well, which allows you to basically hit with like a huge, more accurate Ice-type move, which is kind of its, sort of defining presence in the metagame right now.
Yeah, Loaded Dice, I think a lot of people discounted it at first. And then people started to realize, like, wait, having a reliable, at least 100 base power move is very valuable. So, like in Baxcalibur's case, your options for ice moves are like Icicle Crash or Icicle Spear. I don't think it even gets Ice Punch. And for some reason, it doesn't get Ice Spinner, which would be great, but that's neither here nor there.
Maybe it's for the best.
Yeah, true. But Loaded Dice means that your Icicle Spear will always hit at least 4 times. I think it's a 50-50 between 4 and 5 hits. So you have a 100 or 125 base power ice attack that will never miss. This will come in very handy in this match because we are facing a Dragon Dondozo.
As you will see.
And to your point earlier too, I think one of the big things about facing Dondozo is just knowing what Terra type it is. Because there are so many different Terra types that are viable, so many that were running around the ladder and running around like Battle Stadium and other tournaments that are being held online before this regional. And so the open team sheet, I think, is almost the savior of the format, and that having to play against Dondozo without knowing what Terra type it is sounds a little terrifying.
No, thank you. And luckily we don't have to.
Yeah.
All right. I think we can get into it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So this is turn 1 of game 1?
Yep.
Okay. So immediately Dondozo is on the field, and it is a dragon type.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting going into this game, it was part of the reason that I didn't want to run Dondozo, is that there are a lot of really like sort of like cool, sort of like unexpected moves that good Dondozo players can play, and then it's really hard to play around Dondozo when Tatsugiri's in the back. So we're gonna see it kind of like come right in. There's a little chip damage that goes down, and here we go. Commander is off, and this is like a pretty good position for it too, knowing that it's dragon type, is that it's not really threatened, and now we're to the point where we're thinking about like how Jiseok is going to get into a position where he can handle it.
I think if you're Chuppa in this matchup, especially seeing that the Masquerade is there on the field, you almost have to terrestrialize the Dondozo immediately. Like it's pretty much a requirement into this Masquerade, because otherwise it's just going to ignore everything with a Flower Trick. And I think that was kind of the first way that people fought Dondozo. It was like, oh, I'll just Flower Trick it because it's a water type. But most of the prevalent Terra types are grass resist. Dragon, grass, steel, flying. Those are the 4 big ones, I think, and all of them resist grass, which is not a coincidence.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you can kind of think about playing Dondozo in working like two different ways, where you can either like set it up and try and do a bunch of damage early in the game and then bring in sweepers from the back to try and clean up the game, or you can kind of do it in reverse, where you sort of like put some damage down on things, maybe take some KOs of things that threaten it and try and bring it in from the back. And here in game one, Chuppa's just going to go ahead and try the former option, where he's going to start just kind of like laying down damage. He gets a little bit of a chunk onto Baxcalibur and Tauros, but you can also kind of see how well they both switch into it. And of course, Dondozo not being able to switch out is definitely very prone to Tauros kind of jumping in, jumping out, and I think that's part of the reason that Water Tauros saw so much usage and is like really good in this metagame.
Yeah, for sure. Like Water Tauros immediately is showing its value here because nothing that Dondozo can do on a switch in really is going to punish it. So, and even now, Tauros can pretty freely switch out into Masquerado, which is Focus Sash, and runs no risk of being knocked out, and then come back in the following turn to make sure Dondozo's back down to neutral attack. And even though this Baxcalibur is on the field, already threatening that really strong Icicle Spear, it's one of my favorite things about this tournament was that we saw a lot of ways that people handled Dondozo, other than those kind of cheap one-off moves like Clear Smog, Haze, stuff like that. Didn't really show up as much because people started formulating other game plans. And I think Water Tauros kind of centers a lot of those because it's just so good at neutralizing Dondozo's damage.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is one of... Oh, well, I mean, he gets to cycle the Intimidates here, and I think it actually comes up later in the set as well, which is really exciting. But you can kind of see just how well it does it, and especially when you get to put it next to like a really high damage threat. This is kind of like, you know, this combination of Pokemon is kind of there to beat Dondozo, at least in some situations, and this is where Jiseok is setting up his mid game to try and like pin it down with an Icicle Spear.
Yeah. Alternatively, you can just Terra Water and not have to worry about the order up.
Right. Yeah, I think as long as it's -1, it ends up being, or sorry, only +1, and it's a neutral attack, that it ends up taking this pretty well. But here it doesn't matter because order up is going to go right into the protect, and Icicle Spear is going to go off. And now we're going to see, we're going to have fun with damage Calyx, and I think this would have survived even a 5-hit, but it's only 4 there. Which gives Dondozo the opportunity to at least see another day, and Chuppa's going to lock into rest real quick. And I believe that Jiseok's Baxcalibur is 3 attacks here, and its final attack is actually Ice Shard, which is relevant for the upcoming turn here.
Ice Shard, Glaive Rush, Protect with the 3 we haven't seen. But even then, it just like, that did a lot of damage to what is a boosted Dondozo that already has very, very high very naturally high defense too. And even though it gets the rest off here, it's still at only +1 attack. It really doesn't threaten a whole lot of damage onto either Baxcalibur or Masquerada. And more importantly, you have the easy switch back into Tauros. Like, this is still a position where Jiseok can't really be punished should he make really just safe plays. Like, there's not a lot that Chuppa can do to try and punish like a play that gets called, which I think is kind of the trap that Dondozo can fall into sometimes, is that it's stuck on the field right now, back to neutral attack, doesn't really have great prospects at damaging either of these things, but you cannot switch it out and bring it back in later to try to reset the board.
Right. And I think that even though, like, at the time you're thinking like, okay, that the survive and rest is a really big play, I don't think the momentum really changes all that much. Yeah. Like, it allows Chuppa to get 1 or 2 more attacks off here, but you can kind of see that this position is like totally fine for Jiseok, and he's going to be okay to like kind of play around this Dondozo, especially now that it doesn't have any attack boosts, and you can kind of see that the damage is like bordering on pitiful, given that it takes 2 team slots once it doesn't have its boosts anymore.
And you even saw the order up. That's a stab order up at this point because of the Terra, and it did 35 to 40 to that Baxcalibur, which is also a testament to the Terra Water Baxcalibur. That's just a really strong defensive typing for a lot of things, but especially the Bax.
Yeah, Ice and Dragon types appreciate that a lot, I think. And then Chuppa goes for the Earthquake there, which I think was, I think he maybe thought that Goldengo was coming in anyway, which is maybe why he went for the spread damage, or maybe it was just kind of like a last gasp of like try and throw as much damage down as possible, and hope that my Masquerada plus Goldengo in the back can kind of clean this position up. And this actually is like not a bad position for these 2 Pokemon to be coming into, so I think if you're Chuppa, you probably don't feel too bad about where you're at in this game right now. The one tricky thing is that it's really hard in this kind of position where you're facing down 4 Pokemon to figure out what you're gonna lock into with choice band if you
Right.
if you end up having to.
Yeah, that is the problem you kind of run into here. Is that two of your last three Pokemon are gonna be holding choice items. Just to reiterate what you said, essentially. So you have to be very careful when you're picking your moves here, because if you kind of get one thing wrong, that really is going to set you back for the rest of the game, just because your like options for flexibility are so much lower.
Right, and it's going to be knockoff here, which I think that's kind of like the easiest one to click because you're getting utility out of it, regardless of whether or not you're like hitting super effectively or for neutral damage. Even like the utility of knockoff is so high that even if Jiseok had tried to switch something into that slot, it would have been fine. And I think it's actually better that he didn't switch something into that slot because now you get to bring Tauros back in, which is still kind of like the linchpin of especially against Meowscarada if it's locked into knockoff. Like you want to be able to get it in and out a couple more times if you need to.
Yeah. Baxcalibur, the Ice Shard here is going to come in very handy. I would imagine that with any sort of meaningful chip damage, the Meowscarada gets knocked out by a single Ice Shard. It should do a good chunk to the Tatsugiri as well, just because those don't normally, like, people don't normally train them in bulk when they're running this Choice Scarf Skit with Dondozo. And so it's kind of an important piece to preserve here, especially if you get this Ice Shard. But I guess like opting instead to get that Ice Shard off immediately and just make sure that damage does get on the field immediately.
Yeah, definitely. And now we're gonna see knockoffs traded.
Yeah.
Which is actually that's the Sash one, right? So Goldengo goes right down.
Yeah.
But now we know that Chuppa's gonna have a little bit of a hard time dealing with Meowscarada, especially given that. Well, I mean, I don't think this ends up coming into play, but Tatsugiri has no accurate moves, so that's something you have to be like a little wary of when you're playing your endgame with Dondozo. And also, if it comes down to like Meowscarada versus Meowscarada, like the upper hand is going to go to the one that can protect and change moves.
The one that can Flower Trick, especially.
There you go.
And especially like, I think that was just a pretty natural play for Jiseok there. Knocking off the Choice Scarf from Tatsugiri is big because that means that Tauros and Meowscarada can both outspeed it for the rest of the game. And it also covers for a Goldengo switch. So that was like a smart play there, paying off pretty big because that knockoff taking the one-hit KO. I'm not sure that every Meowscarada is going to knock out every Goldengo with a single knockoff. It might just depend on how they're trained. It might even be rolls. I'm not too familiar with that calc myself. But knowing the Meowscarada is locked into knockoff here is really good for Jiseok because both his remaining Pokemon will resist it. There's not a whole lot that Chuppa can do with this Meowscarada other than try and get some more chip damage down because the items, again, aren't going to matter on Jiseok's end. And I think that was a pretty safe play. Like, possibly you get punished by something like a Draco into the Tauros slot immediately. But even then, the Tatsugiri is going to be locked into -2 and then -4 later on. So I could have gone a little bit worse, I think. I don't know. Now that I think about it, that last turn where the Tauros knocked out the Meowscarada actually could have been pretty poor for Jiseok had that gone the other way.
Yeah, if he had called it wrong, but I think you're still kind of relying on... you probably have to crit a Draco Meteor, right?
Yeah.
Or do you? Well, I guess it depends on if that's KO range for Meowscarada at -2. Had it taken any damage yet, or it still had the Sash intact? Right?
It was still the Sash intact that turn.
Yeah, okay. So I guess it didn't really matter that much. That he would have had to hit 3 Draco Meteors then to win the game, and then somehow also survive like multiple attacks from Meowscarada. So I think that's a pretty Jiseok favorite endgame. But there are ways that like Chuppa probably could have won, but it would have involved kind of like calling that protect from Meowscarada there at the very end of the game, which is kind of like a hard thing to do, especially because it's the more threatening Pokemon on the field at the time.
And it's the one that's going to take 2 hits to knock out no matter what they are, like at least 2 hits,
right.
Because it does have that focus dash still. So I think, assuming that Chuppa has to divert at least some attention to it is a pretty, like I would put more into that than Chuppa like doubling the Tauros or something like that.
Probably,
would have been
a
little bit more risky.
Definitely agree. So we're going here into the game 2, and we're gonna see Jiseok return to his same lead, and then Chuppa kind of like mirror the lead here, which I think is kind of interesting. But also, we kind of talked about it in preview a little bit, but the 2 Pokemon on both sides of the field are actually trained very differently.
Yeah.
And kind of like it's a very like funky matchup as a result. Is that um, the Terra Steel being available, and then the Sash on one side versus the Choice Band, and then the Specs on one side. It's like there are knockouts that are different for both players being threatened in either direction. I think I phrased that correctly.
I followed. The Terra Steel especially is pretty big in this one situation, not one, but in this specific situation, just because that removes the dark weakness, which is going to be relevant for both of the Goldengos, considering they're both staring down
the ghost weakness too.
Yeah. Oh, true. Yeah. For that mirror, because we did see Jiseok's knockoff knock out Chuppa's Goldengo in one hit. And so if Chuppa wants the Goldengo to get an attack off this turn, he essentially has to either call a non-knockoff in that slot, which is a huge risk on game 2 in the finals when you're down a game, or just Terra Steel the Goldengo, which I guess if you have Dondozo in the back, you maybe don't want to do regardless, but it puts him in an awkward spot immediately just because there's a chance the Goldengo just doesn't do anything this game.
Right. And that is something that definitely can't really be afforded.
Yeah. Foreshadowing.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't mean to. Whatever. Okay. So, Masquerade is gonna get withdrawn immediately. As we kind of saw the value of the Sash, especially in the end game there for Jiseok, so he's not gonna really want to be trading away his Sash just for like kind of damage onto the other side of the field. Because trading your Sash for a knockoff into this Goldengo as a Terra Steel is probably not going to end up being worth it. Chuppa disagrees though, and he's going to knock off the Choice Specs, which of course is high value. And then the Goldengos are going to trade Make It Rains. No knockoffs are going to be taken, but like huge damage trades on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, you can just see the power of Make It Rain in general. It's one of the best moves in the game. Interestingly, that knockoff did under half to the Goldengo, which kind of implies that a Choice Band knockoff at -1 would not have knocked it out, which is pretty big info going forward. But losing that Choice Specs means that the Masquerade does stick around, which when you're playing Dondozo, having all 4 of your Pokemon left is pretty big because you do have to play a lot of the game with just one on the field, essentially. So that being the case for Chuppa means that he doesn't have to kind of limit his options right off the bat. He still gets to keep the Masquerade. And it's just a smart knockoff there because like getting rid of a Choice Specs is huge because it mitigates damage. You know that the knockoff is going to happen because it can't protect. It's just a kind of a safe play there, especially threatening the U-turn on Masquerade, which I don't believe Jiseok's had a U-turn.
I
think it was Sucker Punch, right?
I think it's Sucker, right? I can't remember.
I'm
pretty sure it's Sucker. I don't think it has U-turn.
Yeah.
But now Masquerade, even though Chuppa kind of just like laughed in the face of it on turn 1, where he's like, I'm not even gonna tear, I'm just gonna go for it. Masquerade and kind of calls Jiseok on that one there, so it gets to come back into a pretty good position where it's threatening knockouts onto both sides, and actually with a knockoff there, Jiseok is gonna basically take 2 knockouts, and now we're kind of at an interesting point in the game here. Being in the crowd, like, oh, is it Dozo in the back? Or like,
right.
Is this even a good position for Dozo to be in right now? And it is Dozo in the back, and it is a good position for Dozo to be in.
Right, because you have you have the 2-3 disadvantage, but that Jiseok's already used his Terrestrialization, so the Baxcalibur has to stay weak to order up for the rest of the game. The Sash is down on Masquerade, the Tauros is weakened, so a +2 order up might knock it out from this point. And you have your Terra left, so you can immediately turn into a Dragon type, not worry about Flower Trick. You are going to have to take a knockoff if Jiseok wants to, so you might lose your Chesto Berry, but at this point I'm not sure that the Chesto Berry is a key part of this win, because I think Dondozo has the damage in the bulk to just take out the last 3 KOs. And if it can't, Tatsugiri is still around with a Choice Scarf, which is kind of the nasty part of playing this.
Right, yeah, so we're kind of at the point where as long as Chuppa is not like attacking in to protect every single turn, that he is in a really good position to win the game, where he just kind of has to click order up over and over again, and he covers the Tauros into Bex switch, which seemed kind of like it was pretty, well, at least it seemed like the obvious play for Jiseok to make at the time, because you want the opportunity to intimidate it.
Right.
But instead he catches his first order up there, and now he's going to go ahead and switch it out. And we're kind of wondering at this point whether or not, like, oh, does a +1 order up knockout Baxcalibur, because we saw it not really do all that much damage to water type Baxcalibur, to the point where it's possible that we felt like maybe it could live it here. And this is kind of what the game is going to hinge on, is like whether or not he's able to get an Icicle Spear off, because the combination of like Icicle Spear plus Close Combat plus Ice Shard could potentially knock out Dondozo.
Yeah. I remember being in the crowd watching this, thinking that the Excalibur actually had a decent chance to survive this, but looking back, we saw it do like 35 to 40 to the water at neutral attack, which is still a pretty big chunk. And so giving it, like, being at +1 attack instead of neutral and having the Excalibur be a dragon type, weak to order up, I think that's enough of a multiplier to like comfortably go in for that play if you're Chuppa and know that you'll knock it out. Because I definitely agree. I think Icicle Spear plus Close Combat plus Ice Shard, and I think you have to give the Tauros another attack if you play that line too. It gives you the space you need to at least clean up that knockout.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I kind of was just sort of like reflecting on what we were thinking at the time in the crowd, but now that we're able to like sit back down and look at it, it was like, yeah, that was always going to knock out.
Yeah.
It was like a pretty clean end game once Dozo hit the field.
Yeah.
So yeah, now we're gonna go on to game 3 here, and Jake kind of spoiled us a little bit by throwing the leads up there. But we've kind of seen like the Meowscarada plus between 1 and 2 Goldengo leads be what these players are kind of going with in both games here. And then I think notably Jake kind of mentioned the calc that might have some relevance, which is like, does the Choice Band knockoff have enough damage to take that knockout, right? I think that's the one that we were talking about.
Yeah, at -1 it looked like it did under half to Terrasteel Goldengo.
Right, so there's the one. And then the other thing is that these players are also like kind of playing mind games, and we saw Chuppa sort of just kind of like leave his Goldengo there in front of Meowscarada in game 2, and Jiseok kind of like was sort of baited by it a little bit and decided to sort of pivot around and gave Chuppa at least a little bit of advantage on turn 1. So both players kind of have that in mind here in game 3, knowing that there's a potential that depending on kind of what sort of play you go for, the game could like end in either direction very quickly.
Yeah, this is a pretty volatile lead. If we didn't see it be, it has the potential to be very volatile. The game 2 first couple turns weren't disastrous for Jiseok. He was still in the game for a little while after that. But I'll just go ahead and play it. It's about to be pretty rough for one of these two players because I mean, we see the Terrasteel from Jiseok's Goldengo. I think the tricky thing if you're Chuppa here is that if you Terrastalize the Goldengo, you immediately lose the option to do the same for your Dondozo, which almost feels necessary in this matchup. And because of that, he essentially doesn't want anything to be taking a knockoff, decides to either play for a roll on the knockoff. We don't know how either of these Pokemon are trained, so there's a potential that maybe Chuppa thought he could survive that. But instead, the knockoff one-hit KOs as it did in the first game. And even though the Choice Specs got knocked off, the single target damage from Making Rain is enough to clear out the Meowscarada. So, immediate 2-0 lead from Jiseok, which is really, really rough if you're Chuppa here.
Yeah, pretty much a worst case scenario. I'd have to go back to look at the calc, because I can't really think of like, I don't know. I feel like it would have to be really bulky, because even the Terrasteel ones are taking like an awful lot of damage.
Yeah.
From Sash Meowscarada. So I don't know. I feel like, does it ever? Should I look now? But I don't know. It seems like Chuppa was really just kind of like calling the bluff again.
Well, especially given that Chuppa's Goldengo is Life Orb, that like indicates that it's probably not super bulky. It's
That's what I would
maybe
think.
like mostly speed and special attack investment. That's conjecture. Like he could have a bunch of HP on it too, and I guess we could have seen the HP stats and calculated it, but neither here nor there. It's just a really essentially I think Chuppa was just calling a no knockoff into that slot, because I don't think that Jiseok did in game 2. I believe he either protected or didn't knock off that slot.
He switched it out. He switched out.
You're right.
He's hard switched into Tauros.
Yeah. So maybe Chuppa expecting a similar play and Jiseok kind of calling him out for it, which it's bold from either player. Like turn is bold from either player, but I think on Jiseok's end, there's more leeway had you gotten that turn wrong, and Chuppa just happened to make a bad call. Right,
and I guess the other thing is that I guess we're kind of like saying that it's a bad call, but it's also possible that, you know, given this is like a pretty well equipped team to handle Dondozo, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's possible that Chuppa is just kind of like looking at this team and thinking that he needs a strong turn one to like be able to win a game. So it's possible that he kind of feels that the matchup is so bad that he really needs like a ton of momentum turn one, or he needs a knockout, or he really like needs to call Jiseok on something really early in a game to get to a line that allows him to win a game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think there's got to be that possibility. But yeah, we're going to play the rest of this game out. It doesn't really matter. The game's pretty much over here, is that Jiseok gets to go back to the game plan that he used in game 1 to beat Dondozo, except with way more HP and resources at his disposal. So he can basically like get Tauros in and out here infinite times. He can get Excalibur safely onto the field so it doesn't have to take damage on a switch in. Like it seems to be a matter of time here.
It's almost scripted from here, right? Like you switch Tauros in immediately for the Intimidate. You can attack once with Miasperada without fear because you know that you have the Focus Sash. You can bring the Tauros back out, sacrifice the Golden Go if you need to, just because you don't really need the Golden Go's damage anymore. You can Flower Trick, you can knock off to kind of make sure that there's no like rest option for the Dondozo. It's a pretty straightforward line from Jiseok here, especially given that you already have a 4-2 lead, which when you're cycling Intimidate, that is what you love to see.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You want as many Pokemon as possible.
Yeah.
And I think really the only like win condition for Chuppa here is if for some reason Jiseok didn't like sack something off and tried to hard switch Excalibur onto the field and like
happened to catch an
order up or a crit
order
earthquake or something like that. But there's absolutely no reason for anybody that's in finals of a regional to be making that play at all. So he's just gonna like wait till he can get it safely onto the field, and here it is. And he's still got and because Chuppa or Jiseok can intimidate the one extra time, Excalibur is going to be able to take the order up as well. Yeah,
it should be pretty easily able to take a neutral order up. Just because Dondozo, it's only a base 80 move. Dondozo's attack isn't crazy high. Excalibur has some decent bulk to it. It's pretty straightforward from here. You take the order up, you get the Icicle Spear or the Glaive Rush off. Either one is enough in this case. And then you have the Ice Shard to finish it off. And I think if you're playing against Dondozo, this specific situation always feels so good because you have the chance to knock out the Dondozo and immediately damage the Tatsugiri on the same turn. It feels so good.
Yeah, it feels really good. Yeah. It's kind of like the one like exploitable thing about this combination because everything else seems to be like so aggressively in its favor.
Yeah.
Where you can like you switch Dondozo onto the field and like Tatsugiri's eaten immediately. So if you're targeting the Tatsugiri slot, like you lose that. But this is like the one exploitable situation that feels like really good to play against. And I think I said this to Jake on the day of the tournament, but for anybody that plays League of Legends, it's like killing Yumi. That's kind of like the best way that I can sort of at least qualify it in my head. But yeah, this was a really exciting finals, and I think all of Top Cut was actually really exciting.
Yeah, for sure.
There were a lot of really cool storylines going on. Is like we saw Chuppa basically like make a run through a whole bunch of like New York, New Jersey players that
he played both Angel and Jody
in locals for years. Yeah.
The Chuppa Jody match, I think that was top 4, right? That was a really good set too.
That was too, yeah. That was really good. And then I don't think we mentioned it in preview, but the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that this team that Jiseok was running, like a lot of top players knew about it because he had topped Showdown ladder with it with a record of like 59 and 5. His
crazy high GXE too. Yeah.
His GXE was like 91, like close to 91, I believe, which is like the most insane thing that I've ever heard.
Unheard of.
So a lot of players like knew about this team, but nobody knew who it was. There were players that had actually like poached it. Is I think Polar Bear, who finished 8th, had actually like taken the 6. And there were actually a handful of people at the tournament that were playing the 6 because of like how influential this had been to like what I'll call the ladder community. So seeing this kind of like make a run like all the way through the tournament after it had an all-time Showdown performance was also like really interesting to see.
Yeah, that was really cool. I definitely noticed it a little bit. I wasn't taking it too seriously because I think in the days leading up to this tournament, I didn't like believe that Excalibur was a real Pokemon.
I didn't either.
Like half because I didn't think it was that good, and half because it didn't I really didn't want to play against it because it wasn't a super great matchup for what we had.
Yeah, it was kind of bad.
Yeah, but it absolutely proved itself. There are multiple in top 32, at least the two of them, like you just said, in top 8 as well. And Miluka Jiseok clearly making his mark on this Series 1 metagame, and the only Series 1 regional we'll have in North America, unfortunately. But even then, I think, because we were talking throughout the weekend about how the script writers in Pokemon are sometimes not doing their best job, but I think that was a pretty well written story on their end, the Maluka run here.
Yeah, I think this one was really good. It was cool to see them win for sure. But like you mentioned, this is the only Series 1 regional, I believe, at least in NA.
Yeah.
Which is kind of unfortunate because I think it's really cool, but I guess that's a different tangent. We don't really have to get into it, but suffice to say, I think we both really enjoyed Series 1. The tournament was really fun. It seems to be a metagame that actually has like a lot of depth.
Yeah.
Which I think is evidenced by the fact that, as Jake mentioned in preview, we saw like a really important metagame shift, like in real time.
Yeah.
And I think it's also like very undeveloped.
That's the thing with
so
this like series structure.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times we have metagames that'll have these like early meta shifts, like this one with Tauros that we talked about earlier. But I think one of the best parts about having like the year-long metagames like we used to was going back at the end of the year and seeing just how different everything was. Like if you go back to December 2015 and then you compare it to like January 2015, the metagames are like night and day different. Just because people like learned what was good, learned what beat what was good, learned what beat what was good, and it just kind of cycled from there. And it's fun, but there's something to be said about the series too, because it does keep things a little more fresh. It's give and take.
I totally agree with you. That's not like I think back to some of the years that we played series, and like I can't think that of too many people that would have wanted to play Sun series for an entire year. It's kind of like
give me Moon for a year though. Moon was the best, and I will fight you on that.
I don't know about Sun.
Yeah, I won't defend Sun.
I don't know about like any of the restricted formats that we played at the end of 2021, to be honest with you. But anyway, that's it has its pros and cons. But we like this. We'll be sad to see it go. But I think Series 2 will be fun as well, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. I think we'll have the opportunity to do one more Series 1 event, right?
Yeah.
As we'll have
Liverpool, I think.
Liverpool, yeah. Before we get into Series 2, so we'll be diving into Series 2. Well, I mean, I'm already starting to play some games, but you'll see Series 2 content from us in about a month.
In February.
But anyway, it was cool to be back. Thanks so much for watching. We're going to keep these coming now that we've got like a steady stream of events going on. It's cool to have the full live circuit back, and we'll be bringing you some of the highlights from those. And then now that we've got a stream of content, we can always dip back into some of the older stuff if we want to, but I think we'll keep it going with 2023 formats, at least for now. So again, thanks for watching.
This is the first time we've had like live content while doing Feature Site, which is kind of cool. I wanted to point that earlier.
That's cool.
But I forgot.
Oh, yeah, it is.
We started it last summer right after Worlds. Right after Worlds.
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway. Yeah, soak it in.
We've had a break until then.
Yeah. There you go. Cool. Anyway, thanks for watching. Feel free to hit us up on social media. Feel free to hit us up during tournaments if you feel like there's a specific match that you'd like to see us break down. If not, we'll just continue to pick. We have a lot of fun doing that anyway. And until then, we will be back in 2 weeks. Thanks so much, and we'll see you then.